We talk a lot about toxic relationships. People who ignore our limits or pressure us into things that we know aren't good for us, or they leave us depleted and regretful. But what happens when the person doing those things is you? What if the relationship that needs better boundaries is a relationship you have with yourself? Sometimes the person we need to learn to say no to is us. Today, we're talking about what mature self boundaries actually look like and how to begin building them. If you're tired of people pleasing, caring too much, and wondering why peace still feels so hard to hold on to, you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Lori, mom, former people pleaser, and your boundaries coach. Here, we talk about how to protect your peace, set healthier boundaries, and get clear on what actually matters so that you can build a life that feels lighter, calmer, and more satisfying. So let's stop the chaos for a minute, moms, catch our breath, and get into this next episode. Welcome back to Healthy Boundaries for Moms. I am your host, Lori Grimes, and today we are turning the boundary conversation inward. So what do I mean by that? Well, I think it's really easy to identify where someone else is getting in the way of our boundaries, but it's much harder to ask, where am I getting out of bounds with myself? And I don't want this conversation to just become another reason to beat ourselves up or to make ourselves feel bad. We're just not doing it right. It's about not making 20 more rules for yourself, and it's definitely not about perfection. We are not doing that here on the podcast. It's really about developing mature self boundaries. It's about learning to take responsibility for the things that actually belong to us. So in Galatians 5:22-23, it tells us, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So self-control is right there in the verse. And it's not control of everyone around us, right? It's self-control. And before we can develop healthier self-control, we have got to start identifying what is hindering it. So I want to give you 5 questions to help you do that. So the first one is, what are the symptoms? So we've got to start examining our fruit. What is growing on that tree of ours? So what's happening in your life that tells you something might be out of bounds? Something's off. Like, are you constantly overwhelmed or always irritable and exhausted? Maybe you procrastinate and then you're just scrambling to try to catch up. Maybe you're continually saying yes and you're overcommitted, or you're spending more than you budgeted for or that you intended. Maybe you're just scrolling and you're tired, but you just can't stop yourself. Or maybe it's a yes, and then you feel that resentment piling up and building up about everything that you've agreed to, friend, that's on your calendar. Maybe you're starting to notice problems showing up in relationships with your kids or your husband or at work, or your ability to follow through at home. The point here isn't, look at everything I'm doing wrong. No. It is, what fruit am I seeing in my life right now? Because the symptom isn't always the actual boundary problem. Sometimes it's just the smoke telling us where to look for the fire. So number 2, what are the roots? So we need to be root inspectors. Once you recognize a pattern, get curious about where it came from. Why is this particular boundary difficult for you? For some of us, healthy limits were never modeled for us. I know it wasn't for me. And for others, overachieving was rewarded. That was my family. Keeping everybody happy helped us feel safe and belonging and valuable. Sometimes we learn that having needs was selfish. I know in my family, not having needs was like a value. It was like something that you tried to become. It's like having no needs. Sometimes we're trying to meet a legitimate emotional need through something that isn't actually helping us. Like spending can become comfort, and scrolling can become our way to escape. Food can be the way we soothe our emotions, and busyness can become a way to avoid sitting still with what we're feeling. And if you've lived under a lot of legalism or rule following, even the word boundary can sound like one more standard you're going to fail to meet. And that's why simply saying, have more discipline, doesn't always work, does it? We need to ask a better question. What's underneath this? So in Ephesians 3:17, it talks about Christ dwelling in our hearts through faith so that we are rooted, deeply rooted and established in love. And that's the posture I want us to have here. Healthy self-boundaries shouldn't be rooted in shame. No, it should be rooted in love. We're not asking, what's wrong with me? We're asking, what happened here? And what do I actually need? So number 3, what is the actual boundary conflict? So now let's get specific here. Where are you having trouble setting a limit with yourself? It could be eating, money, time. Maybe it's task completion. Maybe you start something you don't finish. It's your phone. It's the words you're using or your temper and how you're saying things. Maybe it's your work. Maybe you're just putting a lot of things off. Maybe it's your sexual behavior. Maybe it's alcohol or some other substance that you are abusing here. Or continually inserting yourself into situations that actually aren't your responsibility. How about saying, I need more self-control? It's vague, right? But saying, I need to stop committing to things before I check my calendar, that is a real boundary. And I need to put my phone down at a certain time. Again, that is a real boundary. How about saying, I need to decide what I'm willing to spend before I walk into the store? Again, we are setting a clear boundary. So if we have the boundary, there's going to be another side to it that we don't talk enough about. Sometimes the boundary isn't about telling ourselves no. It's giving ourselves permission to say yes. We are saying yes to rest, or yes that it's okay to ask for help, or yes that I could leave something unfinished to tomorrow. Maybe it's I can spend reasonable time or resources taking care of myself. And yes, to having needs. It's okay, guys, to have needs. Mature self-boundaries help us recognize both. So number 4, what do I need to own? This is where it can get a little uncomfortable. There is a difference between blame and ownership, right? There may be very real reasons why you develop the patterns you have. I do believe that. You may not be responsible for how the pattern started, but once you can see it, you do become responsible for what you're going to do with it. And that is where boundaries come back to one of the questions we've been talking about over and over on this podcast. You probably heard me saying this a million times. What belongs to me? My husband's behavior does not belong to me. How about that teenager's mood? My daughter's mood. It doesn't belong to me. Someone else's disappointment also doesn't belong to me, and their choices don't belong to me. But your yes belongs to you. Your no is yours, and your calendar is under your control. Your spending, again, is yours. The words you choose, those do belong to you, along with your reactions and your choices. And sometimes we blame other people for boundaries we're not willing to keep with ourselves. Like, everybody takes all my time. Have you heard yourself saying that? But you keep saying yes. My phone is so distracting, but you keep picking it up. Everybody keeps pulling me into their drama. But are you participating, friend? I never have time to take care of myself. But every time I block out that time, do you find yourself giving that time away? That's not about blaming ourselves. It's just about recognizing our power here. We are not victims. We can change what actually belongs to us. And that is a great thing to recognize. Because once you recognize it, then this part belongs to you. And that's something you can take action on. So number 5, what do I need? Taking ownership doesn't mean doing everything alone. In fact, one of the most mature things we can do is recognize where you need help. This could mean a trusted friend or someone you've chosen to be accountable to, a counselor, a recovery community, or pastoral support, maybe even just some kind of professional help, or simply just somebody safe enough that you could tell the truth to. We need relationships, guys, that contain both grace and truth. People who can say, I love you, but I've noticed something. You seem overwhelmed every time you do this. Or maybe they say to us, you keep saying this isn't working, but you keep making the same choice. And instead of immediately defending ourselves, maybe we can stop and ask, is there something here I need to hear? So now we've identified the problem. How do we begin changing it? Because we need to address the real need here, guys. So before you just address a behavior, you need to ask what that behavior has been doing for you. You're getting some kind of payoff for that. What are you actually reaching for? If you're staying on your phone long after you're exhausted, you may still be looking for some kind of relief. If you're spending impulsively, you may be reaching for comfort or excitement or a sense of control. And if you keep saying yes when you're already way overloaded, you may be just trying to feel needed or avoid disappointing someone. The behavior isn't always the need. It's often just the strategy you've learned to cope and meet the need. So Jesus gives us an interesting picture in Luke 24-26. He describes an unclean spirit leaving a person and wandering through dry places looking for rest. And when it doesn't find any, it just decides to return to the person it left. And when it comes back, it finds its former home swept and put in order and clean. And guess what it does? It brings 7 other spirits, even more evil than itself. And the person's condition ends up worse than it was before. Now, Jesus isn't specifically teaching about personal boundaries in the passage, so I don't want to take that out of context. But there's an image here worth paying attention to. It's not always enough to just take something away. You have got to replace it with something healthier. If scrolling is how you've been checking out, what is real rest going to look like, friend? If spending is how you've been comforting yourself, what is going to bring you comfort when you remove that? If overcommitting is how you've been proving your value to people, where is your value going to come from when you stop performing? These are all questions we have got to ask. We cannot just remove the behavior and not address the need underneath. So allow yourself to fail. You're going to mess this up. I am too. We're going to cross our own boundaries. We are going to stay up too late. We're going to say yes when we should have said no. We're still going to waste some time. But that doesn't mean the boundary didn't work. Breaking a boundary doesn't mean the boundary was a failure. It just means we have another opportunity to keep practicing it. Maturity isn't necessarily never crossing a boundary again, right? It's just recognizing it sooner or owning it sooner. It's like rebounding faster and returning to the boundary sooner. That's grace. Grace doesn't mean there are no limits. It just means it gives us room to keep growing. So we need to also listen to empathetic feedback. We need people who can see the things we can't. And not everybody should get a vote in your life, guys. But paying attention to the people who have earned the right to speak into it is important. The person who loves you and says, you don't seem like yourself lately, or you keep saying you're exhausted, but you're adding things to your schedule. These are the things that we need to recognize and ask, tell me what you're seeing. That takes maturity. And sometimes other people can see things that are out of bounds before we can see it. So finally, I want to talk to you about consequences because they do teach us something. As parents, we get this concept pretty well, right? Johnny does this and this happens to Johnny. And we know that that is important for Johnny to go through. We know that constantly rescuing our children from consequences takes the learning part away and we rob them of that experience. But sometimes we rescue ourselves from our own consequences. We procrastinate and then stay up until midnight trying to fix it, or we overspend and move money around so we don't have to change our spending, or we overcommit and then expect everyone around us to rearrange their lives because we're overwhelmed. Instead of immediately trying to make the consequence disappear, we need to stop and ask, what is this trying to teach me? Because exhaustion can show us that we need a time boundary. Resentment can reveal that we've been saying yes when we really should say no. And financial stress can expose the need for a spending boundary. Okay, so consequences aren't always punishment. Sometimes consequences are just the teachers that we need. So here's what I want you to do this week. Don't walk away from this episode and create 20 new rules for yourself. Please don't do that. Just pick one area, just one, and ask, what symptoms am I seeing? What is underneath this pattern? And where is the actual boundary conflict? What part of this belongs to me? And what do I need here? Then start practicing it. Address the real need and give yourself permission to fail and return. Listen to feedback from safe people. Let the consequences of your choices teach you instead of continually rescuing yourself from them. Because we can spend a lot of time asking, who in my life needs better boundaries? But sometimes the answer is me. Not because you're toxic and not because you're failing, but because part of becoming emotionally and spiritually mature is learning how to govern the one person God has actually given you the responsibility for. You, my friend. Hey friend, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, would you take 30 seconds and go join our free Facebook page at Healthy Boundaries for Moms? That's where we go deeper, share what's actually working, and support each other in real life. I will also share some great tools and tips to help you along this journey. I have also included a link to sign up for our brand new weekly newsletter in the Facebook group. Don't forget to hit follow and leave a quick review on Apple. It really lets me know that this podcast is helping you. More importantly, it helps more women find this podcast. Now go, say no to something that's stealing your peace and say yes to something you actually need. And I'll meet you back here in the next episode.